Welcome back to the Midweek Breakdown. My name is the AntMan. Below me, Dalton Miller. To his left, your right, Brandon Stevenson, our special guest this week, Parker Thune. Welcome to the podcast, bud. Good to see you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks for being on. Tell us where we can find you. You're on the radio, you're on podcasting, you blow up X every single day, especially when there's big news, right?
Yes, big news. When there's big news, I'll be talking about it on the Twitter machine. I don't call it X. I refuse to call it X.
I love Twitter. I wish that Elon would have named it Twitter machine. That's what people call it.
Yeah, and people still call it, like, it's technically been X for what, a year plus now. Everybody still calls it Twitter. So
it'll always
Elon
be
needs
Twitter
to just get with the times and change it back. But he did buy the app. He can call it whatever he wants. But I can also call it whatever I want. So
that's true.
There's only one of me on Twitter, so you will find me there. Just look for Parker Thune. It's my name, that's my handle. It's just at Parker Thune. Very easy. I'm the co-publisher of OUinsider.com, currently affiliated with the Rivals Network. Nice. So if you're a Sooner football fan and you like following all the ins and outs of not only the football program and the recruiting efforts, but also we got a lot of inside information on basketball, softball. It's the place to be if intel is your thing. It only costs you a few bucks a month, and I think many of our subscribers would attest that it is well worth their while to stick around for all the information we provide. And then, of course, I do the midday show on KREF, the Ref Radio Network, 12 to 2 with an OU radio icon, an Oklahoma radio icon.
It's true.
In Mike Steely. And then 2 to 3 doing an hour of strictly recruiting talk with my man Grayson Singleton. It's supposed to be strictly recruiting talk. We tend to get off topic a little bit at times, but that's the gig for me.
I started my radio career in Oklahoma City in 1994, so it's 30 years this year. Steely was doing it way before that.
Yes, he was. He's been around a long, long time.
Yeah, good company there, and I'm a subscriber as well. So yeah, I can attest to it being very well worth the money. Let's jump into this. I know we're out of college football season, but you being the guy with Oklahoma football, thoughts on Brent running the defense this year? Is this just a proclamation of something that we all assumed was actually happening the last year, or is this something that's going to be brand new?
Yeah, no, Zach Alley was calling the defense in 2024. That was really the first time that Brent had been hands off in that sense. That, as I understand it, Venables was calling it some, and Ted Roof was calling it some in 2022 and 2023. But Ted Roof certainly did not have full creative control over the game day operation the way that Zach Alley did in 2024. And to be honest with you, I like the move because if you can go get Jim Knowles, you absolutely go get Jim Knowles. That's the best defensive coordinator in college football right now. So it made all the sense in the world for Oklahoma to pursue him. But once he's off the table, there is nobody that I think Oklahoma fans ought to be more comfortable with calling that defense than Brent Venables himself. With all the success he's had as a coordinator, as a defensive play caller in the past, if he's just taken the full measure of accountability for this unit in 2025, in what's really a prove-it year for him and his entire staff, I think that's for the best, because at that point he is shouldering it all. There's no question who the finger points directly at for Oklahoma's defensive performance. Mm-hmm. They do well, that's on Brent Venables. If they do poorly, that's on Brent Venables too. And so I like that the head ball coach in, like I said, what is a prove-it year is saying, you know what, I'm going to take it upon myself to be the one that calls the shots.
The Jim Knowles piece being in a rearview mirror now, what role do you think that Oklahoma actually played in his move? Was he serious about Oklahoma, or were we a pawn?
No, he was very serious about Oklahoma. That was, there were certainly junctures at which there was a widespread feeling, not just locally, but nationally, that was going to happen, that Jim Knowles to OU was going to be a thing. And ultimately, he's a Pennsylvania guy. The Penn State vacancy opens up, which, by the way, how interesting is it that vacancy was only there in the first place because Brent's old boss, Dabo Swinney, hired away Penn State's defensive coordinator, Tom Allard. And so Dabo, in a roundabout way, kind of screwed Brent with that whole deal. But I think absent Penn State, Jim Knowles is the defensive coordinator at Oklahoma today. Never really got the sense that Notre Dame was too terribly involved, or that there was that much interest on Knowles' side in the Notre Dame vacancy, and he was not returning to Ohio State. I mean, could talk quite extensively about that. It's no longer relevant, so I won't. But for many reasons, he was never going back to Ohio State after the conclusion of the 2024 season. So it was OU, where his fiance's at. I mean, she's not in Norman, she's out in Weatherford, but Oklahoma, where his fiance's at, or Penn State. He gets to go home. He gets to coach at the program that he grew up watching and that everybody in the state of Pennsylvania has an affinity for and a reverence for the most part. So, Penn State won that battle. It is what it is. But like I said, you get Knowles, great. If not, Brent Venables is probably the guy you want calling the defense.
Brandon, I think that maybe answered your question about, is Jim Knowles married? Does he have a fiance? Does he have a girlfriend? Did that answer for you?
Like everything you find online is that he's been married to his wife for 37 years or however many years, and they have these kids. And so we've looked at it a couple of times this year, and I've gone back and forth to it, and I never found anything where his wife, I believe online it says her name was Nancy, but I don't know. I've questioned that with a couple of people this year, and they're like, oh, I don't know. So that, I mean, if I'm going to trust anybody, I'm going to trust Parker, because Parker is in this every day. If he's saying it, then I believe that.
I'm just glad to be clear of that whole saga, fellas.
I bet you are.
Very glad to be clear of it.
Yeah. I bet you are. Hey, let me move to the other side of the ball real fast. So we obviously got Ben Arbuckle. We got John Mateer coming in. Is this what can actually put OU over the top? I'll make this kind of a two-part question. Does this put OU kind of over the top? And does OU have the skill players in place to run Ben Arbuckle's offense? I mean, we've heard things about Jaron Canick maybe moving to like an X-back / tight end. Just kind of talk about that and see tell me where you think OU's offense is going to be next year and what the possibilities are coming out of that.
Yeah, well, the first thing that I would address, and just kind of framing this whole conversation, is I would hope people have realistic expectations for John Mateer, because I think there is an overly optimistic percentage of OU fans out there that are expecting that he's going to somehow level up from the 44 touchdowns, FBS leading 44 total touchdowns that he had last year at Washington State, and that he's going to be an instant Heisman contender. And I just don't necessarily think it's not that I don't think that's realistic. It is, but I don't think that ought to be the expectation. My expectation for John Mateer, quite frankly, is that, okay, there's a very obvious jump in the level of competition that he's going to face at Oklahoma versus what he was accustomed to at Washington State. And so I think there's going to be a quite understandable, quite justifiable dip in overall production. And that's fine, right? I don't think John Mateer needs to account for 44 total touchdowns next year in order for Oklahoma to win 8, 9, 10 games and return to respectability in the SEC. Quite frankly, I think if he is what Dylan Gabriel was for Oklahoma in 2022 and 2023, that's going to be more than good enough for this program because of what they bring back on the defensive side of the ball. To your question about skill position talent, there's a lot to be excited about there, both in the backfield. Not really sure quite how that committee is going to shake out, but you look at the backfield and you have guys that have contributed and have made a difference in Gavin Sawchuk, Javonte Barnes, Xavier Robinson, and Taylor Tatum as well. But then you branch it out to the wide receivers, you get Jaden Gibson back from injury. That's going to be huge. You bring a fourfold crop of transfers in, including one guy that folks inside the program are just raving about, Giovanni Gibson. They think he's going to be outstanding. So the Sooners might have hit the jackpot with him. And, you have other experienced contributors that return to the fold at that wide receiver spot, including a couple of guys that played quite a bit down the stretch for OU and had strong bowl games in Ivan Carione and Zion Kearney. But the real wild card to me is a true freshman in Elijah Thomas, who has been, by all accounts, perhaps the most impressive player on the roster throughout winter testing. I mean, the numbers that he's putting up, they're insane numbers for anybody, let alone an early enrollee that just got to campus in mid-January. So that combined with what he did at the high school level suggests to me that Elijah Thomas is going to be a guy that's ready to make a dent from day one, and that's a very exciting prospect.
Parker, let me ask you a hypothetical, and I'll let the guys who know all the stuff about sports ask you the real questions. A lot of fans like to live in this hypothetical world and the what ifs. So one what if question. Every play call is exactly the same as it was in 2024, but Dylan Gabriel was at the driver's seat. Did we have a different year?
You might be one win better, but as I
just
see
one?
Just one, maybe one. But with all the injuries that piled up over the course of the season, well, I take that back because you're winning the Missouri game. You're definitely winning the Missouri game with Dylan Gabriel as your quarterback. So maybe two. My answer might be two. You might be 2 wins better, but I don't think you're much better than 8-5, regardless of who's playing quarterback, just because of the amount of injuries that Oklahoma was dealing with and the attrition, most specifically at offensive line and wide receiver. There's just no overcoming that at a certain point.
So what do you see with the offensive line guys, that couple that we picked up in the offseason? Obviously, Kennesaw State's made a big push, and everybody's like, Kennesaw State, really? But those guys and the guys that we already had and a couple of the freshmen that are coming in, what do you feel like the offensive line production? Do you feel like it's going to be head and shoulders above what it was last year? And is that just because last year was so bad? Or is it because these guys are going to be so good?
Well, let me ask you this. How do you quantify offensive line production?
I mean, making holes, giving opportunities for running backs, and keeping people out of the backfield when the quarterback has to drop back for a pass.
Yeah. Well, I would say, look, the only guys that you can confidently pencil in as starters for 2025, as I see it on the offensive line, are Jacob Sexton at left tackle in all likelihood and Troy Everett at center. Those are 2 guys you can rely on. Those are 2 guys that have been upper echelon starters when they've been healthy at Oklahoma. And I know I don't necessarily know what the public opinion of Fabechi Wiwu is, but there are some that believe he had a much stronger year than the metrics would indicate in 2024. And there are those that believe he had a poorer year than the metrics would indicate in 2024. So I think he's going to have some heat on his heels regardless with Eddie Pierre-Louis. And just that's not necessarily exclusive to his spot at right guard either. You go over to left guard, and Heath Ozida, who concluded the season as the starter and who you would imagine will get the first crack at first-team reps, man, he's going to be facing a charge as well. When you look at some of those younger guys on the depth chart that are going to be a year older, a year wiser, and a year more physically developed, that right tackle spot holds a lot of intrigue because I'm not exactly sure who's going to fill it. I wouldn't be too terribly shocked if they shifted Jake Taylor back inside, and that's another guy that could factor into the equation at guard, because Derek Simmons, I think, is probably the odds-on favorite to start at that right tackle spot, but they brought in Luke Baklenko, a swing tackle from Stanford that probably projects best to right tackle as well. And then a guy that had a really, really strong fall, and you saw him a little bit towards the end of the season, is Isaiah Autry-Dent. And that's what he will be at Oklahoma, is a right tackle, and he could wind up being a pretty dang good one. So is he ready to jump into the starting lineup in 2025? There's a lot to be decided there with that group. But in an overall sense, I think regardless of what the eventual starting lineup is, it's a safe bet you're not going to encounter the same number of injuries that you had to deal with up front a year ago. And certainly there's going to be the reality that whoever emerges in that starting 5, they had to win that job the hard way. They didn't just get it handed to them because there was nobody else. And that was kind of the case at several positions for Oklahoma in 2024. So-and-so was playing, like, for instance, Jacob Sexton played left guard for most of the year. He was playing left guard for most of the year because there really wasn't anybody else at that point. And not at that specific spot, to be clear. There was nobody else at left tackle that they could play there besides Michael Tarquin, who was also needed at right tackle. And so there was a lot of moving pieces that had to be scrambled because nobody was healthy.
And nobody could play two positions
like,
on the line. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you feel like the depth has gotten better in the offseason with the transfer portal and the incoming freshmen? And so we're not going to have so many, this guy has to go to guard because we need this guy at tackle. You know, they're actually going to be able to play their positions. Has the depth there gotten better?
Oh, absolutely. And, you know, I mentioned the transfer pickups, but you look at that incoming class of true freshmen as well. Michael Fasusi is the headline grabber as the only 4-star, but to me, Ryan Foje could be just as impactful because he offers some position versatility. He could play tackle, he could play guard, and he can be a fix-a-flat guy in a sense where I don't think you bring in any true freshman with the expectation that they're going to play right off the bat. But let's say you get in a break glass in case of emergency scenario like Oklahoma did in 2023 and you got to send Caden Green out there. Man, he was ready. I think Ryan Foje would be ready if called upon. And the early returns, and they haven't put pads on yet, so take it all with a grain of salt, but early returns from winter workouts and some of the team activities that they've done so far, they've been really good with Darius Afalava, the former number 1 overall prospect in the 2025 class out of the state of Utah. And so that's somebody that, again, you hope they redshirt. You hope Oklahoma can redshirt them. But
sure,
in a pinch, you got to throw them out there. I think they could hold their own.
So going to the other side of the ball, mainly my big question on the other side of the ball is what does the loss of Danny Stutzman do to this defense? Can we fill that position with somebody that is maybe not equally as talented and equally as sought after as Danny Stutzman? But what does the overall linebacking position on the defense look like coming into next season?
Yeah, Kip Lewis is locked in as the starter at one of those inside backer spots, right?
Sure.
He's somebody you can count on. And then it'll be really interesting what happens alongside him because Sammy Omasigo is somebody that I am very, very high on and have been and think he probably makes more sense at an inside backer spot than he does out there at Cheetah, which is where he's played the majority of his snaps to date as a Sooner. But you have Kobe McKenzie in there in the mix for snaps. I don't know what the outcome of the Jaron Kanik experiment is going to be. If he
that was my next question,
full-fledged switch to tight end, or if you maybe see him out there at linebacker. I know he's been working with the offense in winter sessions so far, so consider that the legitimate wild card that just none of us actually know just yet. But between Kip Lewis, Kobe McKenzie, and Sammy Omasigo, and then you look at Kendall Daniels out there poised to split snaps, I would imagine, with Kendall Dolby at the Cheetah spot, presuming Dolby returns to full health. I like that. I like that picture for Oklahoma. And I'll add that somebody at that linebacker spot that people in the program are really, really high on and that I was told was scout team of the player of the week multiple times throughout the fall and really came on strong throughout the fall is James Nesta, who took a red shirt. I think he only appeared in 2 games. He was Oklahoma's lone linebacker signee in the 2024 class, but that's a guy that might work his way into more snaps than most would anticipate right now.
Okay. Anywhere else on defense that you see a needing to be filled or a position needing to be filled that we can look forward to for next season?
I think Oklahoma's going to be in the market for another linebacker in the spring portal window, and I think they'll be in the market for a cornerback because they anticipated landing Ethan O'Connor, the highly coveted Washington State transfer. That turned into a bag war. Miami won the bag war. Oklahoma had a lot of money earmarked for Ethan O'Connor, enough that they're going to be able to go out come the spring window and land somebody who is really good at that cornerback spot because it feels like something you do need. And I'm not sure whether the need is there at linebacker. Another linebacker feels like a luxury in a sense, but it's definitely a need to me at cornerback because you have nobody that's proven in that unit outside of Eli Bowen and Gentry Williams. And can you count on Gentry Williams being healthy for a full season? That would seem unwise. You hope he's healthy, and you would expect that coming off of that shoulder injury, that he'll be back to 100% and he will be himself and he'll be able to keep it on track. But again, you don't count on that with as much as he has been through physically and as regularly as he has dealt with injury issues. So to add another experienced corner that you can entrust one side of the field to next fall in the SEC, I think that's something that Oklahoma is going to want. I think it's something that folks in the program feel like they need, and that will be a point of emphasis come the spring portal window.
Okay. Dalton, you want to jump in here, bud?
Yeah, I just had one question. A lot of the questions that, Unc asked, we've all talked about had the same. So it's great to hear your insight on it. You mentioned earlier, this is a prove it year for BV. And if it wasn't going to be Jim Knowles, we wanted BV running the defense, calling the defense. What is a prove it year? What is the expectation, in your opinion, for Brent Venables in the SEC this year?
What's my expectation? I expect Oklahoma to get to 8 or 9 wins. And I think if you get to 8 or 9 wins, you might not be feeling good, but you're feeling okay about rolling this thing into 2026 and seeing what you can get. Obviously, there'll be roster turnover once again, as there is for every program in college football come the offseason. But at least you can make the argument that everything is back on track. And look, here's the reality, guys. 8 or 9 wins. Some people are going to hear me say that, and they're going to think, what? This is the University of Oklahoma. In what world is 8 or 9 wins something to feel good about? Right. And this goes back to the broader point, something we talked about even before the season got started, which is you got to kind of reframe expectations transitioning to the SEC, especially with where Oklahoma is at right now, because especially coming off that 6-7 campaign, and as much as they dealt with having to move on from one coordinator, losing another one, having to replace both those guys, as well as a swath of injuries and a significant amount of roster turnover. Is it at all reasonable to expect that team will win double-digit games next year? No. And that's not to say it can't happen, but that shouldn't be the expectation. And especially because you play in the SEC, there needs to be a healthy understanding that it's going to take time for Oklahoma to become a legit powerhouse in the conference. And outside of Nick Saban's Alabama, guys, the other brutal reality is that it's really hard to establish staying power in the SEC. Right. It is. You watched Ole Miss sell out to make a championship run this past year with everything they did in the portal. They won 9 games because that's life in the SEC. Every year, there are going to be really, really good football teams that only win 8 or 9 games because everybody in the league can bring it. Everybody. Right. Think about it. Going into 2024 in the SEC, we all figured, okay, you got 15 serious programs here. Well, and then you got Vanderbilt. Who takes Vanderbilt? And then what does Vanderbilt go out and do? They beat Alabama. They have one of the best seasons in program history. And so there's not even that doormat in the SEC now. It's the most competitive league in college football, and expectations have to be adjusted accordingly.
Sure.
So if that's your position on how many games we can expect, what do you feel like OU's position in allowing Brent to be here for 2026, 2027 season? How many games do you think he has to win to get on to the next season?
So what I've been told, and I how people take this is up to them, but some of the people I trust the most have told me Brent is safe through 2026. Now, there's obviously a world where this thing just crashes and burns and it's atrocious in 2025. And then you have to fire everyone, right? You don't have much of a choice at that point. If Oklahoma goes 4-8, he's not safe through 2026. But I think what comes attached to that is an expectation that things are going to regress to the mean for Oklahoma after all of the bad luck that they encountered in 2024. And so it might be 7 wins. It might be 10 wins next fall. Who knows? But it doesn't seem like there is an eagerness at the administrative level to move on from Brent Venables if things aren't necessarily up to snuff in the eyes of the fan base next year. Because again, if Oklahoma wins 8 games, I hardly think the fan base is going to love that. But that goes back to reframing expectations in the SEC. I think the administration would look much more favorably upon 8 wins than the fan base would. So again, not saying either perception is right or wrong. Just saying that's what I've been told, and that's kind of my evaluation of where things sit.
We talked about where Oklahoma is. What's your view on all of SEC in general? Who, especially in this portal time or post-portal time, at least the first one anyway, how do you feel the other teams are faring with how their transfer portals went?
In the SEC specifically?
In the SEC, yeah.
I think there are a lot of programs across the league that come into the 2025 season right now, at least, with a lot of potential variance as to what their eventual record is. I think the two programs that most everybody feels like they can pencil in as a sure thing in 2025 are, no shocker, Georgia and Texas, and maybe to a lesser extent Tennessee.
Yeah.
But a lot of the other programs in the SEC, man, it's very easy to see them kind of in the same boat as Oklahoma, where if they won 7 games, it wouldn't shock you. If they won 10 or 11 games, it wouldn't shock you.
Right.
That's just life in the league. Like if you're not one of the clear top dogs, and even if you are in some cases, anybody can beat anybody on any given Saturday. And so
look at Vanderbilt, Alabama.
Exactly.
Yeah, would it be all that surprising if Texas, whom many are putting in the conversation, they're way too early national champions for 2025, would it be all that shocking if that team dropped a couple of games in SEC play and all of a sudden the perception drastically shifts? No, it wouldn't be shocking because, again, that's the SEC for you.
We still have a little bit of time. Do you want to hit some basketball, guys, real quick?
Yeah. Dalton, I'm sure you have the basketball questions. You're the basketball guy.
I got one with being the non-basketball guy. I know that Oklahoma was doing really well. I mean, undefeated for a long time, and right there at the beginning of the season. Get into SEC play a little differently. Here we only have 2 weeks left a little over 2 weeks left in February. We're almost to March. How do you feel Oklahoma's faring moving into March?
I don't think they're making the tournament.
Okay. I knew people that were already booking their flights, booking their hotel.
Yeah,
thinking this is going to be amazing.
13-0 in non-conference play.
Right.
I can't really blame those folks.
Sure.
But the SEC in basketball, much like in football, it's a competitive league. It's a deep league. And the concern with Oklahoma and the concern that we were all voicing even after the strong start to non-conference play where they went 13-0 was, do they have a strong enough presence on the interior to be able to defend guys like Auburn's Johnny Broom, whom you saw last night, right? When you're dealing with SEC bigs, is that something Oklahoma is equipped to handle? I don't think there was ever much of a question about the guard play because there's good depth and there's good top-end talent there. I mean, Jeremiah Fears is a lottery pick, right? And he's had some freshman moments, but he's a lottery pick. He gives you a shot against anybody. Down low, though, it's just you have Sam Godwin and you have Luke Northweather. I think that alone, and Muhammad Wagi, who's actually had some strong flashes at times. He's shown you something at various points throughout the season. But the Sooners just don't have a strong enough front court, in my mind, to hold up in the SEC. And that was my suspicion heading into the year. It's certainly been borne out by the results so far. And I just find it hard to believe, looking at the schedule the rest of the way, that this is a team capable of winning enough games to grab an at-large bid. Now, if they do, I'll say this. They are one of those teams that's got bracket buster potential. Would they probably lose in the round of 64? Yeah. But when you have a guy like Jeremiah Fears, man, all he's got to do is get hot, and all of a sudden you could be talking about an Elite Eight team. That is the luxury of having a lottery pick on the roster, is, like I said earlier, he gives you a shot against anybody, and you get to tournament time. That's where you see the stars really start to take over. Well, either they take over or they flop, right? So again, you go back to the Trae Young year. They lost to Rhode Island in the round of 64. Either your guy heats up or he doesn't. And if the season plays out like I expect it to and Oklahoma falls short and doesn't make the tournament for the 4th straight year, it's going to be super disappointing, not just because missing the tournament 4 straight years is something that doesn't traditionally happen at Oklahoma and hasn't in almost half a century, but also because you'll feel you will have wasted a lottery pick in Jeremiah Fears, a guy that is probably going to go on to make a ton of money and play for a decade or longer in the NBA. you'll feel as if you wasted that guy and the year that you had with him.
Yeah. Dalton?
Yeah, that's a fair take. I think my argument with the fierce thing and wasting him would be just that he's also going up against point guards in the SEC who are seasoned, right? Like this kid really could be a senior in high school. Mm-hmm. And so that's the tough part is his freshman moments are showing a lot more in the SEC play than they did early in the season. Oklahoma still obviously has the 3 quad 1 wins. They had the nice win, like quad 2 over Vanderbilt. And now they've got to play Sting of Tennessee at home after, follow up Auburn, whose net ranking is 4. So it doesn't get any easier moving forward. I personally am these guys know it. I'm a Porter Moser guy. I really like Porter, what he stands for. I like the energy that he brings to Oklahoma basketball. But I'm going to ask kind of the same thing. What are you hearing? What are your thoughts? Is Oklahoma ready to make a move if they don't make the tournament this year?
Yeah, look, I expect that they would at that point. And look, I don't love that because much like you, I really like Porter Moser.
Yeah.
Like that's a guy that is easy to root for as a human being. I want it to work for him at Oklahoma. I think a ton of people want it to work for him at Oklahoma. He's much like Brent Venables in that sense, right? Where the results haven't been through 3 years, 3.5 in Porter's case, the results haven't been what you want them to be, what the fan base wants them to be, what they expect at the University of Oklahoma. But you're hoping something breaks his way because he's a good man running a program the right way and loves being a part of the OU family and wearing the crimson and cream. And so my hope is that it works out for him at Oklahoma and they can make a run, get to the tournament, maybe win a game or two, make a statement going into next year. But like I said earlier, missing the tournament 4 straight years, that just simply doesn't happen at Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. And I like Porter just as much, if not more, than the next guy. But likability is something that John Blake had, and I think this fan base is to the point where they don't really care about the likability factor. Their head football coach or their head basketball coach, they want to see wins. And if you're not winning, you're going to get run out of town. So I think there would be a ton of pressure on Joe Castiglione to make a move at the conclusion of this season if Porter Moser can't find a way to get Oklahoma into the tournament. And I ultimately think he would probably succumb to that pressure and be willing at that point to change directions.
Sure. I think my frustration with that is looking at this program is, number one, like if there was somebody better than Porter Moser to come in and take over this program, great. But I would want to make sure it's better than Porter. I mean, Porter's a guy that develops guys. I mean, we talked about it before on ours. You look at Milos Uzan, who's now starting at Houston. You look at Owe, who's now starting at Kentucky. So those are guys that Porter had the opportunity to develop, and then other people came in with a bag and were able to pay him, whereas we're not able to pay those guys. And like, that's my fear about Jeremiah is say he decides not to go to the NBA, which I doubt happens, but another program would be able to come in and offer him the money that he deserves that NIL can pay for that Oklahoma's not. I mean, I have a little bit of an just with Dayton Forsyth, he's his trainer's a really close friend of mine, and Dayton came up and ran a camp for us. And so they've told me a little bit about the NIL structure and what they have there. And when I heard what they were offering for NIL, it was just like, well, it makes sense that some of these top players are not excited about coming to Norman. So that kind of led into my next question of like, I know Porter's asked about a new arena. I know I hate the Lloyd Noble personally for a basketball environment. The atmosphere, student section's nowhere near the court. That's frustrating. I know there's talk about, I think it might have been approved, the like facility in Norman. What do you know about that? Is that happening? Is that going to move forward? What's going on there?
It's a constant seesaw, man. Okay. And it just, it goes into local politics, which I do my best to keep my nose out of. Sure. But it's just, it's happening. Oh, it's not happening. Oh, the plans are advancing. Oh, there's this new obstacle to all of it coming together. And so it's been quite the saga to follow. And I'm not convinced that relief is coming in the near future for Oklahoma, just because of how much of a war it seems to be. in the political realm amongst the people who have to sign off on all of that occurring. And again, I'm not terribly familiar with all of the details. I just know that I am fortunate to work with some people who are very, very tied into local politics, and they don't have any immediate expectations as to a resolution there. It's just kind of stuck in the mud and has been for a while. So look, the Lloyd Noble Center is a dated venue, and that's putting it nicely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Dated 10 years ago.
Yes, it is not
20 years ago.
It's not even designed primarily for basketball. It's a multi-purpose arena.
Yeah.
It's kind of an eyesore from the exterior. And as you mentioned, Oklahoma's just not operating on the same level as far as NIL as a ton of programs that they're having to go up against, especially when you consider this goes back to one major recruiting battle that Oklahoma had a little over a year ago with Providence, right? And you think Providence, how does Oklahoma not beat Providence in an NIL battle? Well, because Providence really only has one sport to fund from an NIL standpoint.
Sure.
Oklahoma has a lot of highly competitive sports, and they've got a pretty healthy amount of NIL funds tucked away, but every dollar has its place, right? And there are only so many dollars to go around. And when you have to fund sports that you expect, several sports that you expect to compete at championship levels,
right,
somebody's going to get the short end of the stick. And Oklahoma basketball, I think, has certainly felt that crunch a little bit. They had to open up the pocketbook to land Jeremiah Fears, which they did. But your point is 100% accurate, which is that Oklahoma just is not equipped, I don't think, to build a powerhouse roster, the likes of a roster that, say, an Auburn or a Tennessee has right now. And so that's going to be a challenge moving forward for Porter or whoever the coach might be. That's not a problem that is solved by bringing in a new coach unless, and this is the asterisk that I'll put on it, many are looking at Kellen Sampson at Houston as kind of the guy in waiting for Oklahoma, if you will. The next man up whenever the Porter Moser era runs its course. Oh, that's got to be the guy, right? He wore the uniform. He was a candidate for the job in 2021. He wants the job. From everything that I've heard for years and years and years, it would be his dream to coach at the University of Oklahoma. You get a guy like that, especially somebody that has a background with the program and has a background as a Sooner. Some of the BMDs, the big money donors, might be willing to open up the purse strings a little bit wider for a guy like that. So maybe that helps shore up that aspect of things for Oklahoma to an extent. But again, it's not an issue that on a large scale is going anywhere, whether or not Porter Moser is retained as coach beyond 2025.
Sure.
That's fair.
Makes sense.
Parker, I live between Austin and Waco. And when Austin got the Moody Center, it was about 2.5 years ago, I was sure that we were only about 1.5 years, maybe 2 years away from Oklahoma getting one. And it seems like that they didn't follow that up very quickly at all.
Did they knock down the Irwin Center?
They did. Yes,
good. That thing was ugly.
Yes. It was, and that was a place that was ugly for 20 years, just like LNC for sure. Before we let you go and we sign off here, of course, we got a big game coming up on Sunday. What is it? What's this 1 point?
1.5 points.
1.5. Where are you going? Where are you leaning? Where's your money?
I want to see Jalen Hurts and the Eagles get the win.
Same.
I don't think it's going to happen.
Same.
There's some Tom Brady voodoo type thing going on with Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs, and there has been for several years now. So I feel like I'm going to watch a movie on Sunday that I've seen before several times over, and as much as I want the ending to change, it's not going to.
That's so accurate.
What'll probably happen?
Accurate.
It'll be a game all the way up until the fourth quarter, one possession down to the wire, and then Kansas City will get it done somehow, somewhere.
Yeah,
that's kind of what I feel like is coming.
Did you see in the press? I don't know. Travis Kelce was on the stand. Did you see the guy that asked him? I told these guys this before the game. The guy that asked him, so do you love Taylor Swift more, or do you love the phantom roughing the passer call that comes in after an incompletion way down the field that nobody saw happen? Did you see that, Travis?
Someday the NFL will stop issuing credentials to idiots like that who are just looking for social media clout. But apparently, that day is not today.
No. There's always
did you
one.
See that? If you didn't see it, his answer was, "Great question. Next."
Parker, I love the cred wall behind you. That thing's filling up.
Yes,
yeah, that's really good.
I ran out of space at the end of the 2024 season. I got to add more. I don't even know what you call the product that I put up. Felt board, I guess.
Okay.
Got to add more felt board and expand it because I'm officially out of space on that thing.
This is when Parker starts doing decoupage with his credentials. Switches them out, puts a new one up for next year. Dude, it's been good to have you on. Brandon, you wanna sign us off, bud?
Hey, Parker, really appreciate you coming on.
Definitely.
Like I said before we went live, I've listened to you for a long time. I've followed your stuff. Obviously, we're subscribers. We love it. We appreciate you coming on with us, and hope maybe we can have you on again soon. If something big breaks or something like that, we'll holler at you and see if maybe you can get on soon. We appreciate it. But guys, hey, you know what they say, right?
The weekend is good,
but the midweek is always better.
And boom goes the dynamite.